Shabbat shalom. By the time I had screwed up my courage to volunteer to speak at Shabbat services this summer, this Shabbat, lodged in the middle of the July 4th weekend, was the only possibility. Although I had several topics in mind, which I actually know something about, I was struck by the opportunity this particular date afforded me to think more deeply about what this beloved country of mine might need from me as an individual citizen, a dedicated progressive, and a Jew in this unsettled, anxious moment in our national history. I don't have it all worked out, which will be obvious to you, but I hope you will find at least a few bits interesting, perhaps even worthy of further conversation. So here's my problem. For a while now, I have been trying to figure out how to feel comfortable, how to reconcile my two essential identities, my Jewish identity, the me who enjoys text study, who wrestles with the God she claims not to know or have, who appreciates what Jews have brought to the world, the Zionist who almost made Aliyah, and for whom still every single drive up the hills to Jerusalem brings tears to her eyes. And my American progressive political identity, the me who views inequality, poverty, discrimination as a deep personal and religious affront, who has worked professionally on behalf of poor and disenfranchised children and families for the past 50 years, and who has not yet lost faith that the arc of the moral universe will eventually bend towards justice. Both identities obligate me to people, causes, values, and political identities that I cherish. They should fit easily together, or at least they should allow for one another. But increasingly they seem or are seen to conflict. I am told by people I love and organizations I have long supported that I can't be progressive if I'm a Zionist or even simply a proud Jew, that I can't be a Chovevei Tzion if I stand on the ramparts for social and racial justice. Maybe some of you hear that too. And then I have to remind myself, right, I've heard this before. I've been there before. So here's how my first round went. Loud.
I don't know anything about it.
Okay. I was first a committed Jew growing up in an average middle-class home. We belonged to conservative synagogues and we followed the standard conservative movement playbook, attended shul and Hebrew school regularly, and then Camp Ramah in the summers. I entered high school as the national struggle for civil rights was ramping up, and it caught my attention. My parents were apolitical, and in fact, our community was apolitical. But the immediacy and energy of that movement drew me in. Two figural experiences at that time occurring in Jewish contexts suggested to me that I could have a second powerful identity as an advocate of human rights without being a disloyal Jew. Indeed, I was more fully Jewish that way. The first occurred at Camp Ramah. As some of you know, Ramah was a Hebrew-speaking camp and included daily kitot or classes, some devoted to text studies, some to Jewish history, and a portion to Israel and Hebrew. All of them were directly relevant to our lives as Jews, but their relevance to our lives, or at least as a teenager would see that, to our lives as Americans, was not underscored. In the June of 1964, 3 civil rights workers who were in Mississippi to help register African-American voters were murdered. 2, Michael Schwerner and Andrew Goodman, were Jewish New Yorkers, and the third, James Chaney, was a local African-American man. It was a horrifying, shocking event, and I remember feeling awash in feelings of dread and foreboding. But then I went off to Ramah. What a relief that would be. And there I was surprised to find that our summer education was to be dedicated in large part to learning about what Jewish texts and contemporary Jewish sources and Jewish leaders had to say about the fight for civil rights. We learned of our obligation as Jews who were fortunate enough to live in a country that espoused freedom, liberty, and equality, to hold that country to its own standards of righteousness. Civil disobedience was one tool we were allowed, even encouraged to use. Civil rights was our issue. It was a Jewish issue. Just 20 years after the Shoah, we of all people should not turn away. And anyway, we would never be safe in the United States unless everyone was safe, everyone was free. everyone was accorded human dignity. The second event occurred soon after in my prose door class at Temple Emmanuel in Englewood, New Jersey. Our teachers were largely rabbinical students at JTS, young, casual, enthusiastic, engaging. One day, one of them bounded into the classroom, clutching a bunch of grapes. He ran up to the front and held them in his fist and shook them for us to see. And with total conviction, he asserted, "These are treif. You shouldn't be eating them at home. We should be boycotting them." What? We were stunned. Then he described the California farm workers' strike and the deplorable inhuman labor conditions under which they worked. And again, how we, of all people, should know better than to enjoy food that came through the oppression of others. Yikes. His treif was clearly not my grandma's treif, not the burying of the utensils in the backyard when I confused the milchik and fleshik treif, nor the kazayat treif that granted an ecclesiastical pass for eating non-kosher food in an amount smaller than an olive, and not even the treif that repeatedly, I believe, hurt my friend Lorraine's feelings when I was forbidden to have even in the most benign after-school snack at her home. It was a treif that finally made sense to me. Holy, not holy, sacred, profound, profane, clean, not clean, accepted, forbidden. The daily practice of kashrut had concretized these distinctions, but to me, they seemed so trivial, so picky, so silly, so actually unnecessary, and so divorced from my life and from the big issues of the day. But now I saw the wisdom in applying those rules, using that language, that template, in a contemporary political context. So I had discovered the world of Jewish ethics, and I was being encouraged, so I felt, to build my American political identity around it, in concert with it. My psyche was roomy enough for both. My parents weren't thrilled. Marches, demonstrations, a scruffy bunch of friends, but there were many Jews among them, and we marched and demonstrated and made lots of noise for Jewish causes too. Soviet Jewry, Israel during the Six-Day War. They didn't stand in my way. Pretty soon, however, there was a problem. I went off to Brandeis, pleased that there were plenty of Jews, plenty of opportunity for Jewish study and practice, and lots of political talk. And in truth, I have to tell you that I had a very narrow set of choices. My parents gave me a very narrow set of choices. Douglas, which was Rutgers, was the state school in New Jersey. Brandeis or Stern College, which was the yeshiva, the women's college yeshiva. So, you know, where was I going to go? But I fell in with the left-wing crowd, a stimulating bunch, animated by the values I held. So far, so good. But in the midst of a demonstration, my second year, I believe it was an anti-war demonstration, sitting there among my good friends, I noticed someone collecting nickels for Nasser. Nasser, a demagogue and a Jew hater who wanted to eradicate my people. Talk about being shocked. Not that I didn't know there was growing anti-Israel sentiment on the left, but naively, I didn't expect it on my small liberal campus, where Jews were also comfortable being Jews and Zionists. At least I had been. The campus atmosphere became more polarized in a now familiar way, and by the next year, I had broken with those friends and gone off to Jerusalem to study. I was completely demoralized by the choice I had to make. Eventually, after a few years, and then for the next few decades, I found a way to thread the needle, retaining but muting both identities, with the context determining which got fuller expression. Now, you know, when you hear Black students talk about the experience of code switching when they are on white campuses, it's much the same thing, you know. So maybe that's how everybody with powerful dual identities navigates. That could be the case, and I think I came to believe that at some point. And for many reasons, for many reasons, but for many reasons, in Micah Goodman's language, the conflict, this polarization shrunk, the extremes seemed less densely populated, the middle became somewhat more capacious, and opportunities for dialogue, both here and in Israel, emerged. So I changed and matured, and the context also changed, and many factors conspired there. But here we are again in a dangerously polarized American political environment that is perhaps even worse than my former one, requiring even more of an accommodation to be made. Now there is a powerful, muscular right wing poised to dispose of our democratic institutions, or so it appears to me, with significant and growing numbers of Jews in the ranks. Now, that may not be the case at this shul, as you know, and it may not be the case in Massachusetts. But if you have friends and family in other places in this country participating in the Jewish communities there, that certainly sounds true, or I believe is true. And it is certainly what young people feel on campuses, our young people feel on campuses. And so that's to the right. So Jews are joining them in increasingly. And that group has captured the pro-Israel banner. And there is a large dispirited centrist group attended to by a vocal left wing that is hostile to Israel and seemingly indifferent to anti-Semitism. And plenty of Jews, including young and unaffiliated Jews, are in that left wing. We've lost the capacious middle ground. We don't know how to talk to each other as Jews and non-Jews, or so it seems to me. We are exhausted. The pandemic didn't help. We've become, we of the older generation have become lazy in defense and in being creative about maintaining that middle ground. And we're increasingly handing off our franchise to the political parties we believe our identities require us to support. Right? So we're not maintaining a center for our young people and for ourselves to have the conversations that we need to have, or so I believe. And we can do better than that. First, let's remember who we are. As Doniel Hartman says, we are an encumbered people. Yes, indeed. For those of us with God in the picture, we start with the first line, that as the first line obligation. We are instructed to act as though we know all human life. Each and every person has a shred of divinity tucked inside. Advocating for human rights, civil rights, justice, and tolerance, we actually can't decide that that's not in our portfolio. Okay, but then we have so many other obligatees, friends and family and neighbor, our country, its people and its ideals, other Jews and Jewish communal entities here and elsewhere, and perhaps in particular Israel, and of course, people of good faith across the globe. This landscape is vast and densely populated. For simplicity's sake, let's focus in on ourselves as American Jews and on the two primary homes of the Jewish people at this time in history, the United States and Israel. Let's start with the home we're sitting in today, our United States, a country that was built on an experimental ideal that has yet to achieve, but still remains on the books. A country of incomparable beauty and rich cultural diversity. A country that took us in, however begrudgingly at times, treated us benignly most of the time, offered us safety, and in which many of our people have thrived. What claims can such a country make on us as individual citizens and as a Jewish collective, if there is such a thing as that? So here's my list of what the United States minimally should expect from me. First, it should expect me to do what good citizens do, be civically informed, knowledgeable about how government works at each level, local, state, federal, and up on the political issues of the day. And as a footnote to this, I taught government policy, social welfare policy for many years. At some point in my tenure, I was talking about the Great Society legislation in the early 60s, and I made reference to how legislation is enacted. And then I turned to my class, these are tough students, undergraduates, also graduate students. So let's review how a bill becomes a law. And what do you think? Most of them couldn't say, sitting in that university at this moment, and whatever moment of time it was sometime between 1986 and 2016, couldn't talk about how a bill became a law. That's shocking. I had to teach it. I had to teach what should be taught in grade school, really. Okay, it should expect me to participate in the democratic process, not only by voting or by financially supporting candidates, but also by investing actual effort on issues of political importance. It should expect me to avoid becoming or being a political hobbyist, which is a term that Eitan Hirsch, who spoke to us earlier last year, coined. Oh, so knowledgeable about the issues, but effectively not doing much on issues to promote issues that concern us. So you learn a lot, but then you don't put that into any kind of active use. It should expect me to follow the rules most of the time, but when a public figure or pronouncement or policy or law is flagrantly not doing the same, I should be expected by my country to work to correct it, to be civilly disobedient if need be. It should expect me to build social capital, to create and sustain social networks within my own community and outside it, to work for social causes that benefit my own community and others different from mine. And most importantly, on this July 4th weekend, it should expect me to embrace, uphold, and fight for our fragile democracy, to support candidates and elected officials, nonprofit organizations, secular and Jewish, that explicitly reflect that position. Of all peoples, we should do that. Okay, and what do I owe my other home? What claims can Israel or my co-religionists there and elsewhere make on me? Although I'm not an Israeli citizen, as a Jew, Israel should expect me to keep broadly informed about what's happening there as well, to be willing to hear bad news as well as good news, to voice criticism constructively. It should expect me also to keep well informed on anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic activity in the US and elsewhere, and to be actively engaged to reduce it. It should expect me to visit, to support Israeli institutions financially and intellectually, and to celebrate Israeli achievements. It should expect me to keep in contact with my elected representatives and others I support financially about issues related to Israel. And it should expect me to insist that any secular entity to which I contribute funds, volunteer, or lend support in other ways eschew anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, period. We are being told that we cannot reconcile these two sets of obligations, that they don't mesh, that we have to choose to prioritize. But I don't think so. And I would hate the young Jews in college to think that that is what they have to do. They have to choose these ideals, or they have to choose those ideals. What a terrible situation for us to put them in. So I don't think that these two lists are mutually exclusive. We can stand by a short integrated list of non-negotiable principles and then mix and match organizations and issues and political candidates that stand somehow in that middle ground, that don't require us to turn off one identity for the sake of the other. Those non-negotiable for me, there are only a few of them. One is our US democracy must be protected and enhanced. We are still in the process of making good on that promise. We surely can't afford to backslide any further than we have already done. Two, the state of Israel and Jews everywhere have a right to exist and thrive. Three, we can work at the same time to preserve and enjoy both the US as a democracy and Israel. We can resist temptation to oversimplify the situation and underestimate our personal and communal options. Finally, the assessment of risk to the security of each of these beloved entities must be frequent, rational, ongoing, and as much as possible, lacking in hyperbole. I had the experience just a few days ago of getting a solicitation from an organization that I support and believe in and will continue to support. It does very good work. And the front of the envelope says, Francine, you are not safe. You're not safe in your home. You're not, I forget it, not safe in your home. You're not safe in schools. You're not safe on the streets. You're not safe. We are not safe. And I was thinking about my letter carrier, who comes from really quite a tough neighborhood, and my neighbor who's not so crazy about Jews to begin with, and wondering, how would they interpret that? What does that sound like to them? You know, we may be nervous about these things, but that kind of depiction of our community for all to see. I think that's a mistake. Okay, so anyway, we have to assess the risks in a timely way and rationally. So we can work to defeat a congressperson who supported the insurrection, which I take to be upholding democracy, while calling out a social justice organization, or the Boston Globe for that matter, for an inaccurate or biased view on Israel or Zionism. So that's acting on anti-Semitism. I can be discerning about where I put my support and energies. I can choose organizations or candidates who integrate my interests, provided they don't drop below that threshold I mentioned. I can pressure those organizations that don't currently make the grade to change their views. So for example, although I have contributed to AIPAC for many years, its endorsement of 100+ members of Congress who were pro-Israel, but who neglected or refused to certify the election, lost it my support. Maybe it can get it back if it moves towards the center. Assuredly, it would get it back if it moves to the center, but it's off my list now. I respect and agree with AOC on many social issues, and I admire her intellect, intelligence, and perspicacity, but I cannot support or endorse her because of her espoused positions on Israel and apparent disinterest in domestic anti-Semitism. I'd be delighted to see her make a move in my direction, but she's off my list for the moment. So that's all true. But let's say we're at a point, I'm arguing, we don't have to choose, we don't have to prioritize, but let's, for argument's sake, say we get to a point where things get much worse for us and we feel we do have to choose or prioritize the best interests of our two homes. In that scenario, in which the risks to US democracy are comparable to the risks to Israel or Jews, I'd likely default to protecting Israel and Jews, following the hierarchy proposed in Pirkei Avot. I'm sure you all know it, im ein ani li mili, right? If I'm not for myself, that's the first category. Who am I for? Ukshe'ani l'atzmi ma'ani. And if I am essentially only for myself, who am I, right? And then the third is the im lo achshad imatai. And if not now, when, okay? But there's a hierarchy laid out. I think there's some wisdom to it. Fair enough, but I don't think we're there yet. And admittedly, our situation as American Jews might change, but I'm talking about right now. I don't think we're there right now. However, concerning the rise in anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is at present, the potential loss of democratic processes the upcoming midterm elections might well bring seems to me the far greater immediate risk. Not only to this imperfect, striving country of mine, the one I love, but also eventually to Jews. We fare better in democracies where we are protected by the rule of law. We just do. And yes, we are a wealthy community, but we've been that before. As we see the dismantlement of some critical elements of our democracy, we should worry. And what that means practically for me is that supporting right-wing candidates in the midterms, however much they proclaim support for Israel, is short-sighted, wrong-headed, and dangerous. And of course, I could be wrong. Now, what about strategies to accomplish our goals? A democratic United States and a safe, secure, and democratic Israel. And my personal goal, identities that are at peace with one another, that allow me to be the Jew I believe I'm obligated to be. There are plenty of good ideas already around and plenty of room for more. If ever there was a time for bold, creative, border-crossing solutions to the challenges facing our beloved country and our wary community, it is now. We have to forge new alliances, try out new ideas, create safe spaces for innovation, conversation, and debate. We need to get to know our neighbors, listen to our young people, and engage people outside our small groups, including those who don't actually have our community's interests at heart. As Yitzhak Rabin quipped when he was criticized for entering peace negotiations with Yasser Arafat, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. On this July 4th weekend, let us commit to becoming better Americans. It will make us better Jews too.